To any of my friends who are interested in aliens, but who are also vegan, and therefore have been keeping your fascination to yourself because you're worried it might make you seem crazy, it might invite ridicule, and might otherwise just denigrate your credibility when you're trying to advocate for animal rights. It is now time to flip that logic on its head, because there is some massive news dropping next week. Actually, I should say public hearings in Congress that are scheduled for next week that are going to allow you to drop the most massive "I told you so" of your entire life about the biggest fucking news in human history. Being right about something of that magnitude might just make your friends look twice at you and think, hey, if he was right about that alien stuff, maybe we should listen about that veganism stuff too. Now, I'll tell you about those congressional hearings in a second, but even if those are not as monumental as I'm quite sure they're going to be, there is already an undeniable amount of peer-reviewed scientific studies already published confirming the fact that the UAP/UFOs that have been observed, photographed, filmed, and tracked on radar in our atmosphere ever since the 1940s are at least 100 to 1,000 years plus more advanced than present-day human technology. As in, they weren't made by human beings. As in, one of the 8.8 billion other planets in the Milky Way alone, 8.8 billion Earth-like planets in our galaxy alone might be a better place to look. And like I said, we're talking about present-day human technology. These things have been tracked on radar since the 1940s. They have been recorded as far back as human history has been recorded, and they make appearances on the earliest cave paintings. And if you think about this logically, what are the chances that these aliens showed up just in the 1940s when humans invented nuclear weapons, and that's when we started tracking them on radar regularly? And by the way, humans only really invented semi-capable radars in the 1940s, so that's when we could start getting undeniable evidence for them. Or is it more likely, given that the universe is 13.8 billion, I'm not sure what the current estimate is, but over 13 billion years old, that, it's possible that this civilization is 200,000 years more advanced than us, that they attained interstellar space travel 200,000 years ago, and may have arrived at the Earth shortly after. I've been meaning to make a video about this for the longest time, ever since I was living in New York City, and back in 2017, UFOs were on the front page of the New York Times when the former director of the US military intelligence program investigating them went on national television, went on CNN, and essentially literally said, word for word, "We are not alone." I don't understand why the rest of the world didn't have their mind blown when that happened the way I did, but ever since that did happen, as somebody who's been ignoring UFOs and aliens my entire life, thinking that's just bullshit, it's just conspiracy theories, there's nothing to it, I was wrong. And once I realized this is dead serious, I've read every reputable book I could find on the topic. Again, I've looked into these scientific studies, watched every reputable documentary, and I will link some of my favorite books and documentaries below. Now, that video I've been meaning to make forever, I want to go in depth into each of these studies. I want to break it down for you. I want to include some of the best footage and photos that have ever been recorded of UFOs, which is gathering now on my hard drive. But, having a full-time job, trying to run an animal rights dedicated company by myself doesn't allow me for a lot of time for video editing, which means I don't get to talk to you about the things that are blowing my mind, that are the most fascinating to me. So I just want to give you the gist real quick, and then you can read the scientific studies, because myself, with a background in political science and the humanities, didn't understand the full depth of those studies. So I actually went over them with my dad, who is a mechanical engineer, who has a background in physics, and could break down those formulas for me that are literal Greek. I don't understand them. A regular person wouldn't. But physics is kind of beautiful in that once you do understand it, and I did study astronomy in university, and I did recognize the same beauty in it as well, that once you understand it, once it's explained to you the first time, it makes just perfect sense. Like when you understand gravity and how it works, everything about how the solar system formed, everything about how galaxies forms makes perfect sense. But just to give you the gist of it, essentially, there are 6, quote, observables. These are characteristics, these are capabilities of UFOs, UAPs, that have been observed and tracked by military scientists going back as far as the 1940s, that are capabilities that are far advanced, that the US military, which is the most advanced technological entity on Earth, does not have and is nowhere near acquiring. And those observables lead those scientists to come to the conclusion that it's not ours, it's not human made, it was made by someone else. It's fucking aliens, y'all. I don't want to get super in depth into all 6 observables, but the most easy to understand one is instantaneous acceleration. While humans do have bullets, artillery shells, and objects, now we have magnetically launched projectiles. What those objects can't do is just change direction at a 90-degree angle mid-flight, because changing direction while you're already going at an enormous velocity is the same thing as smashing into a brick wall. So some of the G-forces that have been observed in these turns in instantaneous acceleration, sometimes from 0 to as much as 30,000 plus miles per hour, which by the way are just speeds that have never been attained by any human-made object ever. Those G-forces would never mind a pilot. You know, some of the people observing are saying, oh, if there was somebody in that, they'd be turned into mush. Obviously, it could be artificial intelligence. These aliens might be some form of artificial intelligence, in fact. But the craft itself, the vehicle, we don't have, from concrete to titanium, we don't have materials that could withstand those kinds of G-forces. Which leads to another characteristic that has been observed with these craft, which is the fact that when they fly through the atmosphere, normally when you break the speed of sound, you go Mach 1, you create a sonic boom. If once you go from Mach 1.999 to Mach 2, you create another sonic boom. These objects have been recorded going, again, upwards of Mach 30 through our atmosphere, creating no sonic booms, which means essentially that they're moving through the atmosphere in some kind of novel way. They're not necessarily displacing the air in the same way as any normal object would, never mind an aircraft, even just a bird, which leads military physicists to hypothesize that these crafts' propulsion systems is based around displacing space-time. It's not exactly moving through the atmosphere, it's bending space-time around it. Which, by the way, when you look at pictures and videos of UFOs, and sometimes they're really difficult to see and it's blurry, and that's people say, oh, it's bullshit, it's not a real thing. An object that is displacing space-time is going to create something called gravitational lensing. For those who don't have a background in astronomy, I only took 1 year of it in university, but gravitational lensing is when light itself can bend around an object of immense gravity. So if you're looking at a star behind another, say a galaxy, the light from that star behind it or the galaxy behind it will bend around the one in front of it. And it will make it look sometimes like there's 4 stars or 4 galaxies behind it. So that might be happening with these craft, which might explain why they're different. Even if you have a 4K camera, it's difficult to see what you're looking at because the light is being bent around the craft. There's other capabilities. One of the other obvious ones is called transmedium travel. It means going from air to ocean to outer space seamlessly. Humans don't have that capability. We do have submarine launched ballistic missiles, which spend like 4 seconds in the water, fly into the atmosphere, and then fly down to the ground and cause a nuclear explosion. But they spend like 4 seconds in the water. They have no capabilities to swim underwater. And UFOs, they shouldn't be called UFOs because they're not just flying, they're in the oceans. Unidentified anomalous phenomenon, that's what the military is calling them, have been tracked on sonar in the ocean going faster than any torpedo or human-made submersible object. Anyways, long story short, they're not fucking ours. They were made by somebody else. But for the people who don't understand the nature of a good argument or presenting verifiable evidence, so you don't care about peer-reviewed science, the people who are not going to accept that there are aliens on Earth until it's on the front page of every newspaper, until everybody's talking about it on social media, those people are about to realize as soon as next week that we're not alone. Here's why. One of the military intelligence officers who works for the government's now pan-military UFO program. I say pan-military, I mean that the U.S. Armed Forces are such a sprawling organization, from the Navy to the Air Force to the Army to the Marines to now the Space Force, that they've now gathered intelligence officers from all branches of the military to look at this phenomenon and take it dead seriously. Now, the representative on that UAP task force from the geospatial intelligence apparatus of the US government, that's the apparatus dealing with satellites, communications, and essentially spying on the Earth from above and spying on communications. He became a whistleblower A whistleblower is very different from what happened to Chelsea Manning or Edward Snowden, who broke the law and gave government secrets that you might think those government secrets should be public or maybe shouldn't be public, but either way, it was illegal to divulge the information that they did. In this case, the whistleblower by the name of David Grush did not break the law. What he said is that there are programs within the US military that have recovered crashed UAPs, crashed alien spacecraft, since the 1940s, and that the US military has been reverse engineering those craft ever since the 1940s, and that the US military has recovered bodies of the pilots. This gentleman by the name of David Grush came forward and filed a whistleblower's report to the Inspector General of the US military, whose job it is to look for illegal activity. In this case, the illegal activity is that those reverse engineering programs were withheld from Congress. On paper, at least, the United States is a democracy, which means civilian control of the military above everything. That's a key difference between dictatorships and democracies. The people, the military answers to the people, as opposed to in a military dictatorship where the people are subservient to the military. So it is illegal for any programs to exist anywhere in the Pentagon that are not being divulged to Congress. They don't have to give Congress every single detail, but they have to know these programs exist. And what is being accused is that these are called special access programs, which means it doesn't matter if you have the highest level of security clearance, you only get access to a special access program if you're on that need to know basis. This is something done to exercise the most extreme secrecy on the most sensitive programs, generally only nuclear weapons, or in this case, alien spacecraft. Now, since that whistleblower came forward, the Inspector General and the Senate and the Congress have looked at his accusations and said they are both credible and urgent. Let that sink in. The accusation that the US military has recovered alien spacecraft and the bodies of some kind of extraterrestrial beings was deemed credible and urgent by the legal authority of the Pentagon. Now, there is a bipartisan group of congressmen and senators. This is a beautiful issue that transcends political differences. Politicians on both sides of the aisle are pissed off. They are fed up with the secrecy. They're fed up with being told bullshit by the military and all kinds of distractions. And they are bringing in that whistleblower, and they are bringing in two of the pilots who have seen UAP firsthand, literal Top Gun pilots, top of the line naval aviators who are entrusted to carry nuclear weapons, who have said firsthand, I've seen these objects. Some of them have actually filmed the objects from their F-18s that could not possibly be of human origin. So these hearings are going to be publicized. It's going to be impossible to deny the facts, and Congress is already moving now to cut funding from any of these programs that are happening outside of congressional oversight. And they are also moving towards criminally charging anyone. They've given, I think, a 60-day window, an amnesty to anyone involved in these programs, saying you can come forward for the next 60 days and avoid criminal charges. And after that, you are facing prison time for not telling the American public and the world public about what kind of alien craft you have. So monumental times we live in. What does this all mean? There are a million different implications of the fact that, we're not alone. One I just really want to highlight and point out, and why I think it's important to talk about this, even if those hearings next week don't make the world wake the fuck up the way I think they will. It's important for us to talk about is because just looking at how bipartisan this issue has been, there's literally nothing. There's literally no other issue that is universally agreed upon by Democrats and Republicans. They're at each other's throats over everything, but they're coming together to talk about this. If that can happen with Democrats and Republicans, I'm not saying it's going to bring about world peace, but I am saying it's going to be helpful. If we're thinking about religious-based conflicts in the world, ethnic-based conflicts, nationalistic-based conflicts in the world, for us to realize, hey, we're all fucking human. They're not. One other funny implication, to any of my friends out there who play the stock market, who gamble with investments, I don't, because I don't have the money to do it. And if I did, that money would be going into my animal rights dedicated company. But to anyone who does play with the stock market, you might want to look very closely right now at any companies involved in space exploration. I think there's going to be a massive increased interest in the near future. So if you make a bunch of money investing in that, please donate some of it to animal sanctuaries, to wild animal refuges. And hey, maybe you can invest some of it in a company that is giving 20% of its profits to those entities. I wish I could, make the most of this news knowing it's going to happen in advance, having read everything I've read, all the books, all the scientific studies about this phenomenon. But if you have the ability to make money off it, you should, and then you should do something good with that money. All right, I don't want to go too far off on this topic because, I've been suppressing it. I've been suppressing my fascination forever, and I've got so much to say about it. Go check out some of those books, some of those documentaries I'm recommending. Live long and prosper in vegan power.